Hi, my name is Stefan Keyes, and you're tuning into the Griot in me. Well, I was actually born and raised in the nation's capital, so I'm first-generation Canadian. My parents immigrated from Jamaica, so I have a lot of ties to Jamaica and that Jamaican heritage. My mom came to Canada in 1974. Yeah, so I'm a journalist, but I like to consider myself more of a storyteller. I take the more artistic approach to describing what I do, because I do have a background in theater. So on top of being a journalist, I'm also a vocalist and an actor. When it comes to my work here in the newsroom, there's a lot of rapport building with the community, especially being a local journalist. You always want to stay in touch with what's happening in the community, and you kind of get the sense that part of your job is to keep everyone connected, keep everyone informed with what's happening in their own backyards, but also with what's happening in and around the world, so that you kind of unite humanity in a way. My job has changed drastically. I mean, I started my career in 2008. I was just a young pup, but I've seen so many technological advances, just even the way we treat our digital content and the internet, and that our website platform versus our TV platform, and having to contribute to all of these different levels to keep people informed. I feel that, when I first started, there's a very healthy workforce in the newsroom. There are a lot of people working on different things, and everyone was kind of broken down into separate skill sets. Now, if you're entering the field, you kind of have to be able to do it all. So as an individual, you're doing more. You're going to be doing the camera work. You're going to be contributing to the website. You're going to be contributing to radio. You're going to be contributing to TV, where perhaps, someone like myself, when I studied journalism and I knew that I wanted to get into broadcasting, and specifically TV broadcasting, that I had no intentions of being a print reporter. But with the resurgence of online media, you kind of have to fall back on your foundation in terms of your literary skills and being able to write professionally. Well, I certainly think you face certain challenges just being a visible minority, or looking the way that you do. I found that there was some identity issues as a youth, where having been born in Canada, your family lets you know that you're Canadian. They want to ensure that you speak the Queen's English, don't speak dialect, make sure you fit in, blah, 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 blah. And, I'd go back to Jamaica to visit my family, and they make sure to let you know that you're a foreigner and, you're Canadian. And so you feel as though that's what you want to hold on to. But then as you reside in Canada or you go to school, people always want to know where you're from. And they never accept the fact that you're actually from here. And I think that was a bit of the identity crisis, where you kind of feel like, okay, well, I'm rejected by, not rejected, but you're labeled one thing in Jamaica and then you're labeled another thing in Canada, and you don't know how to infuse the two or truly embrace the heritage that you want. Because if you go to Jamaica, they're going to tell you you're Canadian. In Canada, they're going to tell you you're Jamaican. I think everyone that came before me inspires me to keep going. I think I've witnessed so many immigrants, newcomers. My mom, my aunts work so hard and essentially paved the way for me to live this wonderful, privileged lifestyle that I do right now. I mean, it wasn't always easy. I was raised in a single-parent household, low-income housing, and so you witness certain things, not only within your own family dynamics, but within your neighbors, within your school peers, because we're all from the same neighborhood, and you start to realize that this is the immigrant story. To come here as an immigrant, truly it's more of an investment into the future. So what motivates me is to make sure that I maximize the return on that investment. Ottawa's interesting. So this is my hometown. I've seen it from the very beginning. I've watched it grow. I've watched the urban sprawl and expand. You know, when we used to first talk about Ottawa, I'd say I grew up in the West End. Now the West End means something different. You know, I grew up near the Experimental Farm, the Fisher Baseline area, and it was easy to say, you know, I'm West End Ottawa. Beyond that was Nepean. Now with amalgamation, if you say the West End, people think you're talking about Canada. And so I think just witnessing that growth and seeing how the city has ballooned and how much it has diversified is the biggest change the capital has seen in the 3 decades plus that I've been alive. That's a tough one. If I am to reflect on life and what it's taught me about myself, I think I would have to say that we all communicate differently. Being in communications, there's that aspect of it, but you know, having gone through several relationships now, and we speak to each other in different ways. My own Jamaican heritage means that I'm a little bit more direct, I'm a little bit more blunt. Canadians tend to be slightly more passive aggressive. They drop hints here and there and expect you to pick up on it. People also communicate differently physically. And so body language, just reading people's body language or even love language has been one of the biggest things that I've taken away from life thus far. And it is just that understanding of each other, which I strive to do on a daily basis. Just even with my job, I think it's so important to acknowledge our differences, not only just of where we come from, but how we try to communicate to one another. And if we are able to pick up on those differences or nuances that kind of bind us as a society, that fabric, then we can all get along a little bit easier, especially when it comes to trying to get people to make themselves vulnerable to you, which is something that I constantly have to do being in the news business. I'm constantly asking people to invite me into their world, to let me into their world, and the approach matters. And culturally, just understanding how to approach certain demographics will matter in terms of whether or not they trust you and whether or not they're going to open up, make themselves vulnerable to you, and speak to you at all. So when I decided that I wanted to get into this career, there was a bit of a social agenda attached to that. I think growing up in the nation's capital and not seeing too many people in mainstream media that looked like myself, or, you know, when it did come to people who did look like myself or who I identified with on the television, they were either athletes or entertainers. And I felt that it was important to showcase something different, that if we're going to create a paradigm shift around stereotypes of the Black male, then I owed it to my community to go forward and have a public profile. Having a public profile has pros and cons, and sometimes you don't even really want to be out there because so many people are invested in your life, and sometimes you don't feel like it's your own. But I definitely feel that I do have this duty to not just the Black community, but the community at large, to show them that, you know, the Black male isn't the criminal that's been showcased in film and television, that it's not just, we're not just here to entertain you, or we're not just here to play basketball and showcase our athleticism, that there's intellect behind what we do. And so even though I do have an artistic background and I do the acting and I do the singing, part of, I think, being a Black male in this form, in this work environment, is also about showcasing that more academic side. And I always remind people, it's not that we aren't out there doing that, it's that not a lot of us have that public profile. So even when you go to university, being first generation Canadian, you kind of go after the high incomes, right? So when I'm in university and I'm looking around and I'm seeing people that look like myself, they're studying engineering, they are in pre-med, they're going to law school, and they're uplifting their family and their social status by doing so. But they're not necessarily seen on mainstream media or have that public profile to remind people that that is taking place. And so I think it feels like a heavy burden to bear. You have the weight of an entire race that you're carrying around sometimes. But I think it's important to do, and based on the feedback that I receive when I go out there, I hope and pray that it's working. What I've learned from my own experience is that you have to be patient. Things don't happen on your timeline. And sometimes when you see it happening for others quicker, don't worry, your turn is coming. So you just gotta persevere and see it through. Because I'm in a profession where storytelling is what I tell people I do, there's very much a professional aspect of that word, but there's also a personal aspect of that word in terms of what I even know about myself or what I know about my family. A lot of it comes through oral tradition and the stories that have been handed down. I don't necessarily have a paper trail of my family tree, but based on what my mother's told me and what my grandfather has told his offspring and everything leading up to that point, I know so much about myself. And I think when you talk about the griot in yourself, that you're talking about history. You're talking about that storytelling aspect that allows you to identify who you are and maybe understand your own history and how you fit in the grand scheme of the world. Like when I think about myself and reflect on my own personal history, I can tell people that, I have a Jamaican heritage. But within that Jamaican heritage, there's a lot of different people from all around the world, that my great-great-grandfather is of European ancestry, that I know I have people in my family of Asian ancestry that all just arrived on this island and came together and built a family. And so when you talk about the Caribbean or the West Indies or island nations, we tend to have this strong sense of embracing different cultures or embracing people that may not look the exact same, because we all have relatives that don't look like we do.